Good morning. Today's daf is daf Yotet in Menachot. Masechet Menachot. We're in the third chapter. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. So, uh, yesterday we saw that Rabbi Shimon said that Kohanim are required for various services, including pouring oil on a mincha. That specifically Yitzika is going to require a Kohen. In fact, it's such an important service that if a Kohen denies that they were specifically commanded by Hashem to do this service, then that Kohen would not be entitled to any portion of sacrificial foods as part of his being a Kohen. And Rabbi Shimon cited a verse. He cited the pasuk in Vayikra, Perek Zayin, pasuk Lamed Gimel, which says, Hamakriv es dam hashlamim ve'es hachelev mibnei Aharon lo siyesho kayamin lemana. And he derived from this verse, first, of course, the services that are listed in the verse need to be done by a Kohen. And then why did the Torah tell us specifically Mibnei Aharon that he also gets it? Because the idea is that any service that is supposed to be done by a Kohen is going to be subject to this rule. And so as a result, so we have to ask if that's so clear. So my time of the Rabbanan, how come the rabbis exclude Yitzika? And that's where we're going to pick up. So we're on the 1, 2, 3, third line up from the bottom of Yudchet Amud Bet, middle of the line. Mem Tet is the abbreviation for my time. So my time of the Rabbanan, what's the reasoning of the rabbis? So Amar Kra, so the Torah tells us, Vayatzek aleh shemen v'nasan aleh livona. This is describing the process of bringing a mincha offering, and the pasuk is Vayikra Perek Bet pasuk Aleph and Bet. So you pour the flour on, you pour oil on the flour, v'nasan aleh levona, and then you put the levona on top of it. V'heviyah el b'nei Aaron hakohanim v'kamatz, and then you bring it to Aaron, and the Zion there goes to the Masoros Hashas that changes it to Kohanim, and so as a result, so that's that. That's telling us specifically that what steps happen before you get to the Kohen. So that's the pouring and the mixing. So all of that happens before you even get to the Kohanim. So of course the Kohanim are not going. You don't need a Kohen to do those actions. So that's the rabbi's explanation. So, and then, right, and you bring it to the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, and then the kamatz, and then the Kohanim will take the kamitza. So that's why everything before the kamitza can be done by even non-Kohanim, and the kamitza ve'elech mitzvus kahuna. Everything that's done from the kamitza and onward, that requires a Kohen. Limad al ha-yitzika ve'uvlila. That shows that when it comes to the pouring of the oil and the mixing of the oil with the dough with the flour, so that shekashera bizarre, it's permitted to have that happen with a non-Kohen. The Rabbi Shimon, okay, well now you've done such a good job of showing the fact that it shouldn't be part of the obligations of a Kohen. Even the pasuk that Rabbi Shimon cited didn't explicitly tell us that it was supposed to be when it comes to the Yitzika and Belila done by a Kohen. It was just a general application of all things that are Kohen supposed to do. So now Rabbi Shimon's in the hard spot, because how could Rabbi Shimon determine, say that you need pouring and mixing to be done by a Kohen when it seems pretty clear that you don't? So Rabbi Shimon, so what does he say? So his last two words on Yerchem Bet, B'nei Aaron HaKohanim Mikra Nidrash Lefanav Ula Akrab. The words that it says that B'nei Aaron HaKohanim, so that we're talking about the Kohanim, are not just teaching us about what happens later, but rather it's also teaching about what happens before. Meaning, just as you need Kohanim in order to take the Komets and everything later, so too you need the Kohanim to do the Yitzika and the Belila. So, the Sava Rebbe Yeshua, 1 second though, that is a principle, the idea that you would use words that are in the middle to tell us both about what happens later and what happens earlier in the pasuk. That's a general principle. The Sava Rabbi Shimon Mikra Nidrash Lefanav Ula'akrav. Does Rabbi Shimon actually say that? But Tanya, I'm going to show you a case where it's clear that he does not think that. Tanya, because we got a brisa. V'lakacha kohen midama chatas be'etzba'o v'nasan al karnos mizbach haolah. That the kohen takes from the blood of the sin offering, and he, with his finger, and he puts it on the horns of the altar that which you put the olah. So be'etzba'o v'lakach. We're going to use the word finger and go backwards to the vilakach. Melamed shelo tehei kabbalah ela biyamin. The lakach hakohen is the taking of the blood, is the receiving of the blood in a kli sharet. So that shows that it needs to be done. Melamed shelo tehei kabbalah ela biyamin. You need to do it with your right hand. And be'etzba'o v'natan, right? The be'etzba'o is between the lakach and the natan. And so we are going to learn backwards to the lakach and forwards to the natan. And so as a result, malamet shelo tehei natina ela biyamin. That shows that also when you do the putting of the blood on the horns of the altar, you mean which are the raised corners of the altar, you need to do it with your right hand. So that's the Tanakama's opinion. But Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Amar Rabbi Shimon v'chinamar yad b'Kabbalah. 1 second. The reference to the etzba'o does not refer back to the velakach, meaning it's not the receiving of the blood. That's not going to go all the way back to there. The hoil v'lo namar yad b'Kabbalah kibol b'shmol kasher. Rabbi Shimon says we don't read from the etzba'o back to the lakach, and therefore, if you receive the blood in the left hand, it's totally fine. V'amar Abaye, and Abaye said about this disagreement in this brisa, b'mikra nidrash lefanav ula'achrav kamiflaki, that what they're arguing about is whether you use a verse, the words in a verse, to explain what happens before and what happens after. Usually, the general opinion would be that you definitely do it with what's after, but it's not clear that you do what's before. And here, Rabbi Shimon explicitly is saying you don't do what's before, and you just said that his justification for saying that you need a Kohen for Yitzika and Belila is based on the fact that you were going to use the word Kohanim and apply it both to what happened before, namely the Yitzika and the Belila, and to what happens after, which is the Kemitza. And so as a result, this shows that you can't use that principle for Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold to that principle. So as a result, we have to give a new answer for Rabbi Shimon. Elahainu time of the Rabbi Shimon. Here is Rabbi Shimon's reasoning. Here is how he can explain that verse and still come to the conclusion that in fact a Kohen is needed for the Belila and for the Yitzika and the Belila. So v'heviyah, there's a vav in the middle of that verse. So as a reminder, what's the verse, right? The verse says hamakriv es damashla. No, that's not the verse. The verse is It's two verses, right? It's Vayikra Parak Bet Pasuk Aleph and Bet. V'nefesh ki sakriv karban mincha laHashem solas yeh karbano v'yatzak ala Hashem v'nasan ala levona. Right, so that's verse number one. That when you with the soul that's bringing the mincha sacrifice is going to be flour, is going to be the sacrifice, and you're going to pour oil on it and put lavona on it. And then you bring it to the Kohanim, and the word at the beginning of the pasuk bet is veheviyah, and so that vav connects, and so as a result, vav mosif al inyan rishon, that just as the bringing is done by the Kohanim, so too the earlier steps need to be done by the Kohanim, meaning, or the Kamitza is being done by the Kohanim in that pasuk, right? The second pasuk, V'yal b'nei Aaron Kohanim v'kamatz, right? The Kohanim are going to be the ones who do the Kamitza, and so just as the Vav tells us that that pasuk tells us that the Kamitza is done by a Kohanim, the Vav at the beginning tells us, oh, and you apply this principle to what came before. So Avesava Rabbi Yeshimon Vav Mavosiv Al Inyan Rishon. 1 second though, you're now telling me a new principle that Rabbi Shimon holds of, namely that when you have a Vav, you use that Vav to tell us not only about the current pasuk, but you tell us about something that happened previously. So Elamei Ata Diksiv V'Shachat Es Ben Habakar V'Hikrivu B'nei Aaron HaKohanim Es Hadam V'Zarku Es Hadam. So when we talk about the pasuk that says in Vayikra Perek Aleph pasuk Hey, I'm sorry, yes, Perek Aleph pasuk Hey, it says that he's going to slaughter the young bull, and then the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, are going to bring the blood and throw the blood. And so, just as we say with respect to the bringing of the blood, that it has to be done by a Kohanim, mitzvah kahuna. So we learn from this pasuk that as soon as you receive the blood, that needs to be done by a Kohen, and taking of the blood and putting the blood on the altar, all of that needs to be done by a Kohen. Melamed al shchita. Well, we should use the vav, right? Because it says vehikrivu, right? So that's just like veheviyah, of the pasuk that Rabbi Shimon apparently is going to use to tell us that the Belila and the Yitzika need to be done by the Kohanim. So do the same thing and say that Shchita needs to be done by the Kohanim. So use the same principle. So Melamed al Shchita, Shekashera Bazar. So 1 second, we are instead going to say that because that it's only from the Kabbalah and onward that you need to use a Kohen, but the Shchita can be done by anybody. But Ila Rabbi Shimon Vav Mosiv Al Inyan Rishon Shchita Hachinami Blazar Tehe Psula. We should say that the Shchita is also going to require a Kohen and is puzzle if it's done by a non-Kohen, because that we have the Vav of Vehikrivu. And so as a result, that Vav should connect the current words of talking about how a Kohen needs to be the one to receive the blood and so on, and say and say that not only that, but they also have to do the Shechita, which is part of Pasuk, part of the Pasuk as well, but the earlier part of the Pasuk. And so, shiny husam. No, so we have an answer that case is different, because the prior pasuk, Perek Aleph pasuk Dalid of Vayikra, says the Amarkra V'samach. It has a parallel language of the leaning. So V'samach V'shachat. Immediately after the V'samach in the prior pasuk, right? The prior pasuk says V'samach yado al rosh ha'olav v'nirtza lo lechaper alav, and then it says the next pasuk is V'shachat es ben abakar. So we're going to connect the samach and the shachat and say that that it's the same, that we have similar principles. Masmicha bezarim, just as the leaning is done by a non-kohen, av shchita bezarim, so too the shchita can be done by a non-kohen. Well, 1 second, once you're going to connect these two principles in that way, Ima smicha bevalim, afshchita bevalim. Well, why not do the following? Why not say that just as the smicha is done by the owner, the one who's bringing the sacrifice, say that the shechita needs to be done not just by non anybody, meaning even a non Kohen. Say it needs to be done specifically by the owner. No, hahu lo matzis amra. That you're not able to say. Why aren't you able to say? Because we have a kal v'chomer, the following kal v'chomer. Ma umazrika de ikar kapara, when it comes to the throwing of the blood, which is the main way of obtaining atonement. So lo bayabalim, you don't need an owner because of course the Kohen needs to do it. Shchita, when it comes to the slaughtering, the lav ikar kapara lo kol shekain. Well, then certainly the owner doesn't need to do it when it comes to the shchita because that's not the primary method of obtaining atonement. The chitema ain't done an efshar mishi'i efshar. Well, 1 second. You can't make that kal v'chomer. The owner can't do the zrika because the owner's not allowed to go to the altar, which is where you do the zrika. And the only Kohanim are allowed to do it. So you can't use that as your evidence. So yeah, you're right. I can't use that as definitive evidence, but when I combine it with something else, you'll see that it is clear that that's true. Gali Rachmana b'Yom Kippurim. The Torah makes clear when it comes to a Yom Kippur that that's in fact the case. Because on Yom Kippur, when it talks about the sacrifices that the Kohen Gadol has to offer, it says v'shachat, that the Kohen Gadol slaughters as parachatas asher lo, the bull offering that is a sin offering that is for him, miklal deshchita ba'alma lo be'inin ba'alim. From the fact that here in this one case we say that the Kohen needs to needs to slaughter the animal, so that shows that in that one instance the Kohen needs to slaughter the animal. In every other instance, the Kohen doesn't need to slaughter the animal, meaning that the owner doesn't need to slaughter the animal, because here the Kohen Gadol is not only a Kohen, but he's the owner of the sacrifice. So unlike every other sacrifice, this one does require the owner to bring it. And so as a result, we now have the explanation, namely that the Vav is teaching us the principle that not only does the Kohen need to do the everything from the Kemitza onward, but the Vav tells us that all the things that are before that in the verse, namely the pouring of the oil and the mixing of the oil with the flour, all of that also needs to be done by the Kohanim according to Shmuel, and so according to Rabbi Shimon, and so as a result, that's the basis for Rabbi Shimon's position. And again, we have the position of the rabbis who say no, you follow the verse as its plain meaning is. And the plain meaning is that everything that happens before the Yitzik, before the Kemitza, can be done by a non-Kohen. And it's only when you bring the mixture to the Kohen for doing the Kemitza, that's where the Kohen needs to start the actions. Okay.
But the shechita can be done by a czar, except
Yes,
for the
absolutely.
Kohen's his own bull, his own par on Yom Kippur. That he has to do, right?
Correct. And we use that case because once we said that Rabbi Shimon says that we're going to learn from a Vav, maybe he should say that even that indicates that a Kohen should similarly have to do every Shechita. And we explained, no, we have a different drasha that undermines the ability of the Vav to be Mosif in that case. So yes, in general, Rabbi Shimon says that the Vav expands the first concept and says that we apply the later principle to the first concept. We're not going to say that with respect to Shechita because of the unique situation of the bull of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, that we learn from that in general, an owner does not need to bring that sacrifice. Be the one who slaughters the sacrifice.
Well, but he's not need. I don't even more than that. He's not allowed to, right?
No. Anybody, a non-Kohen is allowed to slaughter sacrifices.
But even the one on Yom
No,
the
no, the one on
partial
Yom Kippur is unique. We learn from that that that's the unique case. Only in that case do we require the owner slash Kohen Gadol to be the one to slaughter it. But every other case, we are okay with anyone, even a non-Kohen, slaughtering the animal for
but
us.
doesn't with that partial Kohen Gadol doesn't he also he includes who the Beito the
Well,
right
there are several. There are several. There are these. It's not just one. He has one for himself, and then he has one that's for him and his family and household. And then
right
there's one for the and then there's the one for the Jewish people
for
as
the
well.
Kahal for the
Exactly.
Kol Israel.
Correct. Correct. So Amar Rav Kol Makom Shenamar Torah V'chuka. So now we have. So again, we in our Mishnah, we had the principle that there are certain actions that do not need to be done by that do not need to be done, even though they are commanded. They are a mitzvah, as we call it, but they are not me'akev. They are not essential. So how do we determine that? So Amar Rav says, Kol Makom Shenamar Torah V'chuka, anywhere where the Torah says the word Torah, as in the law or process, and chukah for the decree, eno el akib. That is telling us that it is essential, that if you don't do it, it's not going to be valid. So kasakadaitich, I would have thought it since it says when in Rav's statement it says Torah v'chuka, and the vav between them is naturally an and, which means both. I would think kasakadaitich tarti you need to have both. So and isn't that the right explanation? Kediksiv zosku kasa Torah, as we have in the context of the para aduma in Sefer Bamidbar Perek Yutet Pasuk Bet. This is the chukah of the Torah, of the process of the law, and so as a result, that shows that this is in fact the shouldn't that be the way to understand it? So no, not necessarily. V'harei Nazir. So we're going to bring a whole bunch of potential counterexamples to the first approach. This is the first approach. Then we're going to come up with a different approach, and we're going to bring counterexamples to that, and then we'll figure out what really Rav means at that by the in a few minutes. So let's take a look as we go through this process. V'harei Nazir. Well, 1 second. What about the Nazir? Delok siva bay ela Torah. There, it only says the word Torah in it because it says Zos Toras HaNazir in Bamidbar Perek Vav Pasuk Kaf Aleph. V'Amar Rav, and Rav is the one who says Tenufa B'Nazir Ma'akva, that the waving of the offering is required, and presumably that's because it has the word Torah. No, it's not necessarily because it has the word Torah. Shiny Hassam. And so as a result, that shows that Torah alone is enough for us to require something and say that it is essential. No, it's not, because Shiny Hassam will say that that case is different. Keva and Diksiv Kenya Aseh. There, the Torah specifically says in that same pasuk, it says Kenya Aseh. And so as a result, that's not going to be necessarily a proof. The total pasuk is Zos Toras HaNazir, Asher Yidor Karbano LaHashem, Al Nizro, Milvad Asher Tasig Yado, Kafi Nidro, Asher Yidor, Kain Yaseh Al Toras Nizro. So again, the idea is that here we have not only the concept of Torah, but Kain Yaseh. So it shows that he definitely did it. So Kaman Diksiva Behu Chuka Dami. That's like it says Chuka as well. And so as a result, that's what makes it essential. Hare Toda. Well, 1 second. Okay, you've shown that when it comes to the Nazir, maybe it doesn't say both, but we can treat it like it says both. What about the Toda? Deloksiva Bay Ella Toda, Torah. The Toda also only says the word Torah in connection with it. And again, that is in Pasuk Vayikra Perek Zayin Pasuk Yud Aleph, where it says Vizos Toras Zevach Hashlamim. And it goes on to describe the Toda offering. So Arba Shabbat Toda, And we learned in a Mishnah, the Arba Shabatoda Ma'akvin Zedzeh, that the four different types of bread that you have for a Toda, they're all required. And if you're missing any of them, the sacrifice is going to be invalid. And yet, that only has the Torah, so doesn't that show that Torah alone is enough to tell us that something is essential and you don't need to have both? No, not necessarily. Shiny Toda, the Itkash Nazir. There is a hekesh between Toda and Nazir. Diksiv al Zebach Todas Shlamav. That when it comes to the Toda, it says that this is the Toda of the Shlamim. And so Ba'amar Mar, and so it's said in a brisa, Shlamav, that the fact that it says his shlamim, it means l'rabo shalmei nazir. It comes to include the shlamim of the nazir. That just as there is a ma'akev nature to nazir, which we saw before, is because it says kain yaseh, we're going to say that there's a ma'akev nature to the toda offering too. All right. So as a result, that's effort number 2 has been unsuccessful. So, one second. So, what about the Mitzorah? Bahare Mitzorah, Deloksiv Be Ela Torah. Again, when it comes to the Mitzorah, it says the word Torah and it doesn't say Chukah, because it says Zos Tiet Toras HaMitzorah Biyom Tahara. So, in Perik Yudalid Pasuk Bet of Vayikra Utanan, and we saw Arba Minin Mitzorah Ma'akvin Zedzeh. The 4 different things that you need for a mitzorah are all essential, and if you're missing any of them, it's not going to be valid. And where is that? This is a Mishnah on Kaf Zayin Aleph, and what are we referring to? Well, Rashi helps us out. It's basically middle of the narrow lines in Rashi. Arba'ah shebemitzorah, eitz erez, that's cedar wood. Ushani, that is the crimson thread. The Ushni Tolas, that's the crimson thread. The Azov, that's the hyssop. Utzvitzi Porim, and the birds. So as a result, those are the 4 things that you need to have. And if you don't have any of them, it's not going to be valid. So again, Torah, even without the word chukah, indicates that it's going to be essential. No, not necessarily. Shiny Hussam. That case is different. Kevan diksiv zos tiyet torasa mitzorah keman diksiv bechuka. Because it says this will be tihiyeh. Tiyeh is a verb of definitiveness, effectively, and so as a result, that it's as if it said chukah also, and so as a result, that's not going to be an exception. It's consistent with the rule that you need Torah and chukah in order for there to be an obligation and essentiality to what is being discussed. V'harei Yom
There may
HaKippur.
be only one place where it says Zot Chukat Torah, and that's in Parshat Chukat.
Yes, you're absolutely right that there's only one place. And so it would be kind of funny if that were how we to end, because essentially we're finding out that every place where it says Torah is an exception, and you need to have both Chukah and Torah. And so as a result, that would be very odd. You're absolutely right. Thankfully, we don't end with that. But Hare Yom Kippurim, we're still challenging the idea though. Delogsi Be Ela Chukah. 1 second. I'm going to go now in the other direction. I'll show you that there's a place where it only says the word chok, and we say that it's required. Utnan, and specifically on Yom Kippur, and that's because it says, V'haisa lachem l'chukas olam b'chodesh hashvi'i be'esor lachodesh. And what do we say about that? We have a Mishnah. Again, this is on now Kaf Zayin Amabet. Shnei Sirei Yom Kippurim Me'akvin Zedzeh. The 2 he-goats on Yom Kippur are both essential. You can't have one without the other. Ella, so 1 second. So as a result, and there isn't another verse or anything else that we can cite to with respect to Yom Kippur, and so as a result, Ella O Torah O Chuppah O Chukah. So when Rav said at the beginning of this discussion, Kol Makom Shenemar Torah v'Chukah, it doesn't mean Torah and Chukah. It means Torah or chuka, because the word letter vav, even though it often and generally means word and, it can also mean or, and that's the case in this statement by Rav. So that's where we are at the moment. Maybe it's but you can have either. Wait though, I can show you a place where it says Torah and it isn't essential. V'harei sha'ar karbanot. When you come to all the other sacrifices, the ksiv behu Torah, where it says with respect to it Torah, the loma akve, and it isn't essential because the Torah says when it comes to Vayikra Perek Zayin Pasuk Lamed Zayin, it says Zos HaTorah la'olah la'mincha la'chatas la'asham v'la'miluim v'lazevach hashlamim, and yet there are many aspects of these korbanot that are not essential. And so as a result, just as an example, Rashi gives this example, right? Veloma akve, the Amar Beperakama, we saw in the first chapter of Maseches Menachos, Daf Daled Amud Aleph, but Asham, when it comes to the Asham sacrifice, Hu Atzmo, Ba'asham Hu, Atzmo Shalo Huktaru Amurav, it's Ba'asham Hu Atzmo, Shalo Huktaru Amurav, right? That if you have an Asham where you have not burned the burned portions, kasher, it still provides atonement and it's still a valid sacrifice, even though you're supposed to burn pieces of it and you didn't. Ubemincha ksiv v'zos toras hamincha hakrave dahainu hagasha v'tanan lo higish kasher. And similarly, when it comes to the mincha, we have that you have to bring it close, which is the bringing it to the southwest corner. And yet we saw that if you don't bring it to the southwest corner, it stays kosher. So those are just two examples of sacrifice of services in connection with sacrifices where the Torah uses the word Torah because it says Zos Torah la'olah mincha la'chatas, etc. And yet there are procedures that are not essential. So we now have to clarify further. So it is not actually Torah or chukah, but rather Torah baya chukah. Torah requires the word chukah in general, or some other word that is equivalent to the word chukah. V'chukah lo baya Torah. But the word chok does not require the word Torah. So 1 second, Torah v'chukah kamar. But 1 second, that wasn't what Rav said. Rav seemed to be saying Torah and chukah. How are you going to read that into his words? Hachi kamar. Here's what he's saying. Afal gap diksiv Torah iksiv chukah in ilo lo. No, it went once you have the word Torah. V'ha Torah, right? When it says that, let's go back to his original statement, that it says kol makom shenemar Torah, that any place where it says Torah, that is not enough. The chukah, you need to also have chukah. That's what it's saying. And so as a result, that's the point. V'harei mincha, but 1 second, what about the mincha? D'ksiv b'chukah, it has the word chok with respect to it. V'amar Rav, and Rav says, kol makom shehechzer kasav b'toras mincha, eino elo la'akev, hechzer in, lo hechzer lo. But 1 second, there is one place where you have the word chok, and it's with respect to the mincha, and yet we see that there are various places that the mincha is not essential. And indeed, Rav himself says that having the word chok isn't what makes anything essential for a mincha. Rather, what makes something essential for a mincha is the repetition of it. And so how can you say that chok alone is sufficient? So shiny hasam, that case is different. Deki ksiva chuka a'achila ksiva. That when it says the word chok with respect to when it says the word chok with respect to the mincha, it's talking about the achila. And so when it's talking about the achila, that is not the services that are associated with the sacrifice. And therefore, that word chok does not teach us that those services are essential. It's not about the services. And so as a result, Therefore, when it comes to a mincha, it doesn't have the word, it's not treated as if it has the word chok, and therefore only where something is repeated will it be essential. V'harei lechem hapanim. But one second, what about the showbread? Dekiksiva kuka. There too, it says chok and a'achila ksiva, and it says it with respect to the eating, and yet utanan shnei sidarim ma'akvin zedzeh, the two arrangements of the lechem apanim, meaning the two columns, they are each essential. You need to have both of them. And shnei bezichin ma'akvin zedzeh, and the two spoons of lavona are also essential, and you need to have both of them. And you need to have both the piles and the spoons. Ma'akvin zedzeh. You can't be missing any of these things. Any pile, any spoon, none of them can be missing. Elakol heicha tiksiva achila akula milsa ksiva. No, really. So doesn't that show that when it comes to any time it says chok, even with respect to eating, it shows that it applies to the entire matter and not just the eating, meaning it applies even to the bringing of the item, and therefore it should also apply to the offering of the mincha and make every aspect of the mincha essential? No, not necessarily. Shiny hasam de amarkra migirsa umishamna, that from its ground flour and its oil. That's a pasuk by Yikra Perik Bet, pasuk Tezayin. And so, and what that is telling us is because it didn't, it could have just said migeres umishemen, meaning why did it say its oil and its finely ground flour? It's telling us that that's what's going to highlight the essentiality. So as a result, the chok isn't what tells us it. So really, when it comes to chok, it tells us that it's essential unless it's going to be unless it's with respect to eating. And so as a result, and Torah alone does not teach us essential. It needs something in addition to it. And when it comes to the mincha, then repetition is what teaches us that something is essential. So again, bottom line is you need the word chok. It could be chok with the Torah or without the word Torah. And that's going to be show that something is essential unless it's about eating. And then we can have other words like girsa and shamna teaches us that something's essential, and chok, and Torah alone is not going to teach us that something is essential, but rather you need Torah with something else, and we saw that in many times there's other words like kain asu or whatever, that you can have other situations where the words teach us it, and so that is the bottom line. Okay, so during this discussion, and now we turn to the top of your Amud Bet, and the first few words are deleted by Mesoras Hashas. So we pick up with Gufa, the first word on the second line of Yutet Amud Bet. And we say, and we saw that Gufa Amar Rav Kol Makom Shehechazer Lecha Kasu B'Torah Mincha Einu El Akev. So Rav says that when it comes to something in regards to the mincha offering, if it's repeated, that tells us that it's essential. Shmuel Amar Geres v'shemen ma'akvin ve'ein davar acher ma'akiv. No, the only things that are essential are the geres and the shemen, and that's because, as we saw, it says migirsa umishamna, and its oil and its fine flour. And so as a result, those are the things that are required. Everything else is not. Vila Shmuel, Afal Gavta Tana Bekra, Loma Akvale. So a second, are you telling us that really when Shmuel sees something that's repeated, it's not going to be Ma'akev, Ela Kol Hecha de Tana Bekra, but Vadai Ma'akva, but one second, it certainly has to be ma'akev. V'hacha b'mulo kumtso b'kumtso kamiflagi. No, that can't be. It can't be that what Shmuel is saying that is that if there is no, if even if there's repetition, it's not ma'akev. Rather, what he's arguing about is in the concept of milo kumso and bekumso. And now, what is that? What are that is a reference to Vayikra Perek Bet Pasuk Bet, where it says Leviel b'nei Aaron HaKohanim, v'kamatz bisham milo kumso, so that's the milo kumso, misalta umishamna, al kol levonasa, v'ktir HaKohen ez azkarasa hamizbecha, ishe reach nichoach lashem. And then it says later, v'hirimi menu bikumso, misolas, that's Vayikra Perek Vav, Pasuk Chet. And so as a result, those two psukim. So the question is, what do we learn from those two psukim together? Meaning, why does it say one time the full kometz and the second time to say his kometz? The Tanya, we have a brisa that explains it. Now, this brisa everybody agrees to, but the issue is we'll see that there's something after the brisa where they disagree, where Rav and Shmuel disagree. So Milo kumso bekumso. Why does it tell us both of those? Yaseh midala kometz. Shalo yaseh midala kometz. It's telling us that you're not allowed to make a measurement for the kometz. Now, of course, we saw that you have to do an entire process to do the komitza. So the idea could be that you would do the process and then you would measure, or you would measure the amount and make sure that you had broken up enough flour that you would have sufficient for your komitz. You'd put it back into the bowl, and then you'd do the kamitza from that amount or something along those lines. Because obviously, avoiding the kamitza would certainly not be sufficient. So you have to have some level of kamitza. But the idea would be is that you can't use a measurement to figure out how much your kamitza should be. So Rav Savar Hanami Tana Bekra, and Rav says, you know what? The Torah itself repeats to tell us that this is essential. Diksiv vayakrev es hamincha v'yamalecha po mimena. Now this is a verse which says, and he brought the mincha near and he filled his palm from it. This is a mincha that was brought as part of the inauguration of the Mishkan. And so as a result, although Rav says that that is considered a repetition and therefore shows that it is essential that you use your hand and that you not use a measurement vessel to determine the amount of the kamitza, Ushmuel Doros Misha Lo Yalfinan. Shmuel disagrees, and this is the disagreement that they have. That sometimes, that yes, in general, repetition does tell you that something is ma'akev. But it's got to be a repetition with respect to a sacrifice that is offered in every generation, or in every generation that the Beis Hamikdash is standing. And this is a sacrifice that is offered at one time, namely only when the Mishkan was being dedicated. And so as a result, he says, Doros Misha Lo Yalfinan. We're not going to learn from to an every generation sacrifice from one that is offered only at one specific time. And so as a result, that's why he would say it's not necessarily required. To lo yalef shmuel
What's not required?
What?
That the measurement's not required, or what's not?
No, that a hand that again the lesson of the brisa is that you can't use a measurement vessel. And so and the repetition shows that that it's absolutely essential that you not use a measurement vessel. So it's a little bit backwards. Essentially, we're saying what's essential is the thing that you're not doing, meaning that the opposite is essential, meaning using your hand. So you have to use your hand, and you're not allowed to use at all a measurement vessel. Now, of course, essentially, everybody agrees that the hand usage is essential for a kamitza. So the question is exactly how one goes about using the measurement vessel is not clear at all. But the bottom line is that according to Rav, if you were to use a measurement vessel, you would have invalidated the sacrifice. And according to Shmuel, you're not supposed to use the measurement vessel, but if you do, it's still going to be a valid sacrifice.
And that's only because it was for Horat Shah?
Because the repetition of it was at a for a sacrifice that it was only for a shah and only at a particular moment. Namely, it was the repetition of it with respect to the mincha was not a mincha that is offered for all generations, but a mincha that was specifically for the dedication of the Mishkan, and therefore not something that you can use as a basis to learn uh, 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 a general rule. And so, whereas Rav says no, even a repetition that is only with respect to a sacrifice that is offered at one time, since it's also mentioned somewhere else, we're going to say that rule applies both to every generation and is essential. And so, as a result, for Rav, it's essential that you not use a measurement vessel.
So, as almost as an aside, perhaps there would never be a fixed measure for this kamitza. The kamitza is very individualistic, depending on the size of the hand of that particular Kohen who does the service.
That is essentially what we're saying. That's exactly right. Because you might have thought that maybe we should use a measurement vessel in order to say that it's consistent across various korbanot. And we say no. First of all, everybody agrees that you're not supposed to use it. And not only that, but Rob will tell you that if you do use it, it's not a valid sacrifice. So, in second, though, are you telling me that Shmuel doesn't learn about sacrifices for every generation from a sacrifice that's done once? Because below Yellow Shmuel Doros Mishah Ba'atanan, when it comes to Klei Halach, Mikad Shines Halach, when it comes to, we saw this is a Mishnah in Zvachim, at the end of Zvachim, Daf Pei Chedem Aleph, that when it comes to vessels that are for liquids, are used to sanctify liquids. Midos, and when it comes to measurement vessels for dry things, yavish for dry things, megachines yavish, those can only sanctify dry things. Vein kli alach megachines yavish, below midos yavish, megachines alach. You can't cross use a vessel. If it's supposed to be for liquids, then you don't use it for solids. If it's supposed to be for solids, you don't use it for liquids. V'amar Shmuel lo shanu elamidos. When it says with respect to the liquids, there too, it's only with respect to measurements. Aval mizrakos, when it comes to the basin where you put the mincha offering, and it's not for, where you put all the flour and oil to begin with, and it's used for mixing, and it has nothing to do with measuring. Mekadshin, that you can sanctify things with it, even solids, even though it's for liquids. Diksiv, after all, it says, and this is a pasuk in Bamidbar that's repeated 12 times because it's talking about the 12 of Nisim, the offerings that they made at the inauguration of the Mishkan, Shneim Mileim Solas, that you had two silver bowls and they were both filled with fine flour for a mincha offering. And so bowls are, of course, for liquids, and yet you filled them with flour and they were Makadish, and we're using that principle of that one-time thing to teach us generally. No, shiny Hussam, that case is different to Tana Bakra Tresar Zimnit because it repeats itself 12 times. And so as a result, it isn't just a single repetition, but rather you had these 12 repetitions, which all of them were not necessary. It could have just said once and say that everybody brought the same thing. But the fact that we said it 12 times shows that, in fact, in that instance, you can learn. So in general, you don't learn from a sha'ah to a doros, but in this one instance, we will allow it. So now, Amrule Rav Kahana Ravasi. So Rav Kahana, Amrule Rav Kahana Viravasi Lurav. Rav Kahana and Rav Asi ask Rav. 1 second though, Vaharei Hagasha. What about the bringing of the korban to that southwest corner, to Tana Bakra, below Ma'akva? There, the Torah repeats the concept, and we say it's not Ma'akiv. In fact, we saw again in that Mishnah, right, that we said that if you don't do the Hagasha, it's going to be okay. So Man Tanabe, but 1 second, where did the Torah repeat it? Meaning the first time it says it is it says that you need to bring it near the altar, right? The main source is Vayikra Perek Bet Pasuk Chet, and it says that you shall bring it near the altar. And the second pasuk is going to be Vayikra Perek Vav Pasuk Zayin, where it says Diksiv. So Mantanabe, where is it a repetition? Diksiv Zos Toras Hamincha Hakrev Osa B'nei Aaron Lifnei Hashem. That this is the law of the mincha. You need to bring it to the children of Aaron. Need to bring it before Hashem. So, and earlier, and it says then, and the next words, it's important to know this, that the next words in the pasuk are El Panei Hamizbeach, to the front of the altar. And so this is the second verse. But hahulik bo'alam makom hu da'asa. But you know why we have to repeat it? Because we don't know where near the altar. The first verse told us near the altar, but it didn't say which side. So as a result, this verse is not coming to tell us that it is ma'akev, it's coming to tell us where. Titania, we have the following brisa that explains it. Lifnei Hashem, the verse that we just cited, namely Vayikra Perek Vav Pasuk Zayin, ends with the words Lifnei Hashem, that it needs to be brought before Hashem. Yachol b'ma'arav, I would think that means anywhere to the west side of the altar, because that's going to be near the opening of the Heichal, and in the Mishkan it would be near the opening of the Mishkan. So Talmud Lomar El Panei Hamizbeach, but it also says El Panei Hamizbeach. I'm sorry, the Lifnei Hashem is earlier in the pasuk. The last words of the pasuk are El Panei Hamizbeach, and so, but the pasuk then says that you need to bring it to the front of the altar. And where is that? El Panei Hamizbeach. If you say just El Panei Hamizbeach, Yachol B'Darom, I think that means the south. So Talmud Lomar Lifnei Hashem. So that's why it also says Lifnei Hashem, which means to the west. So HaKetzad, how do you accomplish both the south and the west? So Magisha B'Keren Drom is Ma'aravis. You bring it to the southwestern corner. And the southwestern corner is going to be a great location that will both be on the side of the Mizbeach that is near the Heichal, and it's on the side of the Kevesh, which is like the front of the altar. So it works. So Keneged Chuda Shel Keren, by the tip of the corner, Vidayo, and that's going to be sufficient. Meaning that's going to be sufficient to satisfy both approaches. Now it's not completely clear why you have Dayo here, but I would think that it is because maybe that you would say that it's not sufficient, because if in fact the altar is either in the middle of the courtyard, or it's on the south side of the courtyard, you are not actually going to be, if you're at that southwestern corner, you're not going to actually be opposite the opening of the sanctuary. But we're going to say that's sufficient because it's going to enable you to still satisfy both aspects of the pasuk, meaning that you need to be both in the south and in the west. All right, so that's that position. The Rebbe
Now
Eliezer,
Rashi has a diagram. It seems to say, according to the diagram, it seems that the closest point to Lifnei Heichal, Lifnei, is Tzifon Ma'aravit and not Drom Ma'aravit.
yes, that's exactly why I'm suggesting that it says the word dayo. That's exactly right. Because again, remember, we only know that there are two things. Lifnei Hashem tells us west side. El Panei HaMizbeach tells us south side. So even though now you're going to put it in the southwest corner and it's not going to be in front of the door to the Heichal, dayo, that's sufficient. That's how I'm reading this. It's not completely clear how that is, but we're going to note that there's going to be a different view about where exactly the Mizbeach is. Remember, there are three different views. It's either that it's all in the south, which is what Rashi shows currently. It could be smack in the middle, and so that would be a second opinion, where again the southwest corner would not be opposite the doorway, and it could also be all in the north. And we're going to see that last opinion right now. Rabbi Eliezer says Yachol Yigishenu L'Ma'arava Shel Keren, L'Droma Shel Keren. It could be that you're supposed to bring it to the west corner, west of the southwest corner, or you're supposed to bring it to the south of the southwest corner. So Amarta kol makom she'ata motze shtei mikros. Whenever you see two psukim, with one, you fulfill it and the other. And one, you fulfill one and not the other. You put aside the one where you would negate one of the psukim. And you grab onto the one where you fulfill itself and the other. And so, how does that work in this case? Exactly. When we say it's got to be before Hashem, it means that it's got to be to the west. Bitalta El Paneam is Badarom. But if you do that, if you do the west side, you are certainly no longer fulfilling the idea of being in front of the altar. Because if you are west of the southwest corner, you are going to not be south of the altar. So that is not going to be El Panei HaMizbeach. So you're negating it. But, Ksha'ata Omer El Panei HaMizbeach B'darom. But when you say that you're going to be to the south and you're going to be in front of the altar, Kiyamta Lifnei Hashem, you can still fulfill being before Hashem. What? How can you fulfill being before Hashem? That's what the Gemara is about to ask. Vehecha Kiyamta, how did you fulfill it? So Amar Rav Ashi, Kasavar, Haitana Kulim is bad, but Safon Kai. No, Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says that the altar is fully in the north. And you know what's true? If you're on the south side, just south of the west southwest corner, you are still, because the entire altar is in the north. That means the bottom of the altar is right opposite the entrance to the Heichal. And so if you are at that southwest corner, even though you're south of the altar itself, so you are still going to be opposite the opening of the Heichal. And so as a result, it is still going to be Lifnei Hashem, because you're right opposite the opening, and it's going to be El Panei HaMizbeach, because you're on the south side of the altar. And so therefore, Rabbi Eliezer would say that's how you solve it. It's not just the southwest corner, but you're going to be on the south side of the southwest corner, so that you are right there at El Panei HaMizbeach, right at the opening of the Mizbeach, which is the south side of the Mizbeach, and everything is wonderful. And so that is how we have this. And now we can go back and analyze Rav's ruling, right? Rav is the one who says, right, that.
Well, why isn't that fulfilling? If the whole Mizbeach, he's on the southwest corner of the Mizbeach, so he's not really south of the Mizbeach, not really, because he's on the southern corner of the Mizbeach. So he's still really part of the Mizbeach, right? If he's
No.
standing there.
The point is that we want. Of course, he's at the mizbeach. He has to touch to the mizbeach. So he's touching the sacrifice to the mizbeach. So he's out that southwest corner. The point of it is that he needs to be based on the way I'm reading Rabbi Eliezer, that there are three different quadrants at that southwest corner. You could be southwest of the southwest corner. And if you're southwest of the southwest corner, you are neither west of the altar, nor are you you are neither directly west of the altar, nor are you directly south of the altar. Okay? And again, what Rabbi Eliezer is saying is that on some level, we want to fulfill both El Panei Hashem, El Panei Mizbeach, and Lifnei Hashem. And if you're southwest of the southwest corner, that is not going to be valid, because you're not going to be El Panei Mizbeach, because El Panei Mizbeach means that you are south of the altar, south directly of the altar, meaning that if you look north, you're looking at the altar. And so as a result, he says that you have to be directly south of the altar, in that small area between the southwest corner and the ramp. And because in that location, if you look to your left, you see the opening of the Heichal. And so as a result, therefore, you are definitely Lifnei Hashem, because you look to your left and you see the opening of the Heichal. and you look to your north and you see the altar. And so as a result, you are fulfilling both the concept of Lifnei Hashem. When you look to your left, you see the opening, and El Panei Mizbeach, that you're at the opening of the altar, because when you look to your north, you see the altar. And so therefore, he's what he's saying is that you need to be in that little space south of the altar, west of the ramp, and not too far west, because you want to be so that you look north and you see the altar.
So he's a little bit, he would take a few feet back from the altar platform. So therefore he's south of the altar. That's what he wants to say. But if he's actually at the southwest corner, touching it, then he's touching the Mizbeach. He wants to say that he want to be a
No, no,
few
no.
feet south.
You're gonna be able to touch the altar. You're supposed to be sufficiently close that you can touch the mincha to the altar, and you're touching it to that southwest corner. But which side, right? There are three different quadrants that you could be in. You could be south. You could be west of the southwest corner and west of the altar. You could be southwest of the southwest corner, in which case you are neither west of the altar, you're not directly west of the altar, you're not due west of the altar, and you're not due south of the altar. And you could be due south of the altar and still right next to the southwest corner. All three of those are
Right.
possible. And what he's saying is you should be due south of the altar, because when you're due south of the altar, well, then you're El Panei HaMizbeach and you're Lifnei Hashem, so you're fulfilling both requirements.
Mhm.
Okay, that's the way I'm understanding Rebbe Eliezer. Whereas, according to the Tanakama of that brisa, all you have to do is be anywhere in that. You could be either west of the southwest corner, you could be southwest of the southwest corner, or you could be south of the southwest corner. All of those are okay, because all that matters is that you're at that corner. Whereas Rebbe Eliezer says that something more matters. You have to be south, due south of the Mizbeach, and due east of the opening of the Heichal, and that is fulfilled if you are standing south of the altar near that southwest corner. All right, so we will pick up, God willing, from Maskevlo Rav Huna to begin asking on questions on Rav's opinion. We've clarified Rav's teaching, and so the Gemara is ready to challenge it. But for that discussion, you'll need to stay tuned
So
to
he'd
tomorrow's
be a
class.
few inches, whatever, or millimeters from the actual corner itself. That
A
would be
hundred percent
constitute. That'd be constituting south. That would
correct.
constitute south of the altar. So he could look forward to the north, and he's actually seeing the mizbeach.
Exactly, exactly. That's how I'm understanding Rebbe
This is a
Eliezer's
matter of
teaching.
millimeters or inches.
Correct,
Whereas
correct.
the southwest corner is mamash right at that corner, at that angle
Correct,
itself.
correct, correct, exactly. And so the Tanakhama, that's the difference between the Tanakhama, and the Tanakhama is essentially saying you could be anywhere near that southwest corner, and Rabbi Eliezer is saying no, you got to be on the south side of the southwest corner so that you look north and you see the altar. That's how I'm understanding. All right, have a great day. Have a good Shabbos.